we were all going to bed, and she sat up in her bed and started hysterically crying and saying, "I just want a gun, give me a gun, I'll go and kill as many Israelis as I can." And we all sat up in our beds. It was dark, and we were all sleeping in the same room in different beds. And we sat up and said, "Are you saying you want to be a suicide bomber?" We were so surprised. And she said, "No, no, I don't want to be a bomber, I want a gun. I want them to give me a gun, and I want to kill as many Israelis as possible." And we said, "Well, you do realize that would end in your death. That's a suicidal act." And she said, "Yeah." So in a sense, she wanted to be, you know, not explode herself, but she was going to do the active shooter thing. And we asked her why. Why would you want to do that? And some of the answers we already knew, but she said, "Don't you remember on every wall in my room," and this is the room we were in, but it was dark, "there's a picture of my best friends, all of them martyred, all of them killed by Israeli soldiers." And she said, "What do I have to stay alive for? I just want to do revenge." And so you see her individual vulnerability, very different than maybe someone that, you know, is joining just for the gang of guys kind of thing. And thankfully in her case, her group didn't equip women, so she didn't have a chance of getting the gun, which we're very glad about. And but anyway, with these four things, the group, the ideology, the social support, and the individual vulnerabilities, I also saw that it broke out according to the context where it happened. So individual vulnerabilities in a conflict zone would be very revenge and trauma oriented. So if we were working in Iraq, the guys that were in the prison, they had been arrested in somewhat violent ways. And one of the things I told our general is, if you want to put them through a rehab program, you probably have to apologize for the violence that they encountered at their arrest, whether they deserved it or not, because our soldiers were scared. You know, is this guy wired up? Is he going to explode himself when we're trying to take him down? And they got their punches in, and kicks, and whatever else it happened to be. And then, you know, worse things than that, they had traveled through a checkpoint and the soldiers had shot the entire family because they got scared, you know, as young soldiers might do at a checkpoint, or that their home had been taken, that they'd lost their job, their livelihood. And there's all kinds of things that in a conflict zone people have trauma for. And usually we find, if we look at PTSD, we find up to 70% of post-traumatic stress in conflict zones, especially among the young people. And then when there's a group ready and willing to equip them for revenge, oftentimes people, when they get an overwhelming trauma, will act that way. For instance, we had a Chechen that when her family members were killed and tortured and she found their bodies, she immediately, although she hadn't been radicalized before, she hadn't been following an extremist ideology, she'd been exposed to one. It was the martyrdom ideology. And she went to the group, which she knew where they were, and she told them, "Equip me to be a bomber." And she went back to the guy that had killed her family members and asked him, he was in a police office, asked him, "Do you remember me?" And that was the end of their conversation. She took him with her. But anyway, when you're in a non-conflict zone, it's more nuanced. And when I went into Morocco and talked to the Friends of the Casablanca bombers, I found that they told me a lot about poverty, of being stuck in their lives with complete despair. They said they could get a university education, which in a way almost made it worse, because they could get educated, they had satellite TV so they could see how the rest of the world lived, but they couldn't get out of the slum. And they said it was impossible to get a job with their address,